Trump hints Iran talks could resume this week as U.S. port blockade continues. Before we start, hit the like button and do not forget to subscribe our channel. You can support us only this way. We can post more news with your support.
Trump hints Iran talks could resume this week as U.S. port blockade continues. President Donald Trump has suggested talks aimed at ending the war in Iran could resume this week after negotiations collapsed at the weekend, prompting the U.S. to blockade Iranian ports. "You should stay there, Islamabad. Really, because something could be happening over the next 2 days, and we're more inclined to go there," Trump was quoted as saying in an interview with the New York Post. His remarks came as the American military said no ships had passed through the U.S.-enforced blockade of Iranian ports and coastal areas in the first 24 hours of the operation. The standoff has raised doubts over the prospects for a 2-week ceasefire that is due to expire next week. The Iranian side has not yet responded to Trump's remarks, but United Nations Secretary-General António Guterres said it was highly probable that talks would restart. Gulf, Pakistani, and Iranian officials also said negotiating teams from Washington and Tehran could return to Pakistan later this week with no date yet agreed, Reuters news agency reports. Hopes that diplomacy might continue helped soothe oil markets, pushing benchmark prices below $100 on Tuesday. Iran has effectively shut the Strait of Hormuz, a crucial global waterway for oil and gas transport, since it came under attack from U.S. and Israeli airstrikes on 28 February. More than a dozen U.S. warships and some 10,000 U.S. military personnel are now enforcing the blockade against vessels of any country entering or leaving Iranian ports, starving Iran of a vital economic lifeline. It is aimed at putting pressure on Tehran by targeting 2 of the country's major money sources, oil revenue and the significant tolls Iran demanded from ships for passage through the critical waterway. U.S. Central Command, which has responsibility for U.S. military activity in the Middle East and parts of Central Asia, said 6 merchant vessels had complied with direction from American forces to turn around and return to Iranian ports in the first 24 hours of the blockade. Ship tracking data analyzed by BBC Verify showed that at least 4 Iran-linked shipping vessels had crossed the strait despite the blockade. At least 2 of the ships had previously been at Iranian ports. A further 3 ships that were not linked to Iran were seen to have crossed the strait after the blockade started on Monday, BBC Verify found. Initial high-level negotiations that took place in the Pakistani capital of Islamabad over the weekend failed to produce any deal, with the U.S. saying that Iran hadn't agreed to its terms. Iran's nuclear ambitions were a key sticking point. The U.S. had proposed a 20-year suspension of all uranium enrichment by Iran, a U.S. official told the BBC's U.S. partner CBS News. But Tehran had suggested a halt of 5 years, sources told other U.S. media. Vice President J.D. Vance, who led the U.S. negotiations in Islamabad, told a conservative political event on Tuesday that he believed Iran wanted a deal. "There is a lot of course, mistrust between Iran and the United States of America. You are not going to solve that problem overnight," Vance told a Turning Point USA event in Georgia. As the International Monetary Fund warned the war could plunge the global economy into recession, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent told the BBC that a small bit of economic pain is worthwhile for long-term international security. But China described the blockade as dangerous and irresponsible and warned that it would only exacerbate tensions and undermine the already fragile ceasefire agreement. Meanwhile, Israel and Lebanon have agreed to launch direct negotiations after talks in Washington on Tuesday, stemming from Israeli airstrikes on their northern neighbor, targeting the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah. The meeting at the U.S. State Department marked the first direct talks between the 2 countries' officials since 1993. A U.S. official stressed to the BBC that there was no link between the negotiations between Iran and Islamabad and the Israel-Lebanon talks in Washington.